Hello and welcome to Neeti Ravaz, your to be favorite podcast of the day that aspires to inculcate policy discussions into our mainstream tradition. So grab your cup of coffee and beware because you might just lose track of time. Hi, I'm Aditi and I am joined by Navya as my co host today to discuss that is India ready for a unified sports legislation? Indian sport today is full of contradictions. On one hand, we talk about growth, leagues, sponsorships, and global ambition. On the other hand, some of the biggest sports are stuck in courtrooms, governance deadlocks, and financial uncertainty. This year alone, disputes in Indian football has reached the Supreme Court, not because of match fixing or criminal wrongdoings, but because the system itself does not know how to resolve its own conflicts. So today we are asking a bigger question: is India ready for a unified sports legislation? And to understand that, we are using football as our example. India is considering a unified sports governance framework, a law that would bring uniformity, transparency, and accountability across all sports federations. But while the intention sounds promising, it also raises serious questions about centralization, autonomy of federations, and private investment. Football right now sits at the center of this debate.
So, joining us today are Lokesh and Srushti, who have been closely following Indian football governance and the business side of the sport. Both of them have worked on this and studied the league structures, federation issues, and public private models the Indian football has relied on since the last decade. And here today, they help us to understand what's going on wrong and why. To start off, if someone hasn't been following Indian football closely, how would you describe the current situation? Because from the outside, it looks like a league that was supposed to transform Indian football, and now, and it's completely stuck.
Sure, I'll take that question. Like you rightly said, Indian football is at a place where there's no headway, there's no progress. Uh, Another thing that you mentioned was that you rightly mentioned was that Indian Football League (ISL) when it started in 2014, it started with a lot of promise. It started with a big bang with a lot of investors, a lot of global superstars that came into play in India, which attracted, of course, the Indian audience to a large scale. The stadiums were full. There were a lot of sponsors that were attracting major investments into teams. Indian football was on an unprecedented growth trajectory at that point in time. That's what it seemed like back 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But unfortunately, over the last few years and where we stand today is a very sad situation. What has happened right now is the Indian Football League, the Indian Super League, which is the top division league in India, that has not started yet. And it's not started, and we don't know whether it is going to happen this season at all. And it's the major fault, and the major reason for that is because of the administrative lack in the top tier of football, where the people who are actually out there to govern and administer the sport have failed to do their to take on their responsibilities, and they've ensured that we've reached a point of stalemate where it doesn't appear how the situation is going to resolve. Just to give you some more details into what the situation exactly is, 15 years ago in 2010, the All India Football Federation, which governs the football in India, had signed Reliance FSDL, Reliance-backed FSDL as their commercial partners for a 15-year period, and that agreement had expired December 8th of 2025, and the commercial partner and the federation have been in discussions over a possible extension of that commercial contract, but that hasn't happened, which means that the federation does not have enough funds of their own to conduct and run a league. And since then, AIFF has also been caught up in a Supreme Court case where their constitution was challenged, where there were some irregularities in the way their constitution has been set up, there were some irregularities, alleged irregularities in the way the current governing body was appointed into its current position of running the federation, and that Supreme Court case has dragged on for a good part of 7-8 years, and it's almost reached a point of conclusion where where just a couple of months ago in October, the constitution of AIFF was finalized, and since then the federation has had a right to tender to find new commercial partners for the league, but it has failed in doing that. There were no takers to the bid that the federation had put out, which means, in simple terms, that there is not much interest, or the way the bid was designed, the commercial partners did not find any interest in bidding into uh, the the current system that AIFF had proposed, which is why we're in a constant seesaw between going back to the Supreme Court to make amendments to the Constitution, to the Sports Ministry being involved, but there seems to be no resolution in sight. And what's also very important to note is that the Supreme Court uh, has been the one that's been taking decision on AIFF to draft their constitution. Uh, the process, like I said, was very long, and finally we've reached a point where the constitution it has been designed, but again the new constitution has been implemented, but it comes with certain challenges, which is not allowing the federation to have the flexibility to find commercial partners based on the market interest, and it's not been able to generate that. So, which is why we find ourselves in the situation where now, even if the federation has to make some changes to their constitution, they need to go back to the Supreme Court, and the way Supreme Court sometimes functions because of the state capacity, etc., it just becomes difficult to make small amendments and changes, without which the AFF is not able to then move forward. The sports ministry has clearly come out and said this is a private, not a private, but this is a tournament which is not specific to the national team. So the funding cannot be diverted towards running of the football league. And the sports ministry at this point is just trying to uh, is just trying to act as a act like middleman to find a resolution between the clubs, the federation, and the commercial partners, which again takes us back to the need of a sports tribunal possibly in India, which could just help speed track a lot of the processes, and uh, also implement something like a unified sports legislation, which then gives more authority to uh, the national sports federations to be able to make changes to their constitution based on at the same time being compliant towards the state laws as well as international laws, which the respective sports are governed by. Football, for example, is also largely governed by FIFA laws, and the national federations are required to abide by those laws. And but again, there could be provisions in the unified sports legislations which could also give the flexibility and the freedom to the national federations to be able to act accordingly and in the best interest of what is actually the urgent need of the situation. So this is just to summarize the current situation of where football stands in India at this point in time.
Yeah. So, if a unified sports law is introduced, how would it change the Indian football currently? And what are the specifications that the lawmakers should learn before drafting such law?
Sure.
Um, I mean, I can speak some on this. So, like, as we know that a National Sports Governance Act has actually been introduced, and I mean, there's many features of it, but some of the main features are that they want to have one, I guess, one central sports board, right, which is like centrally things will be run, so it takes power away in many ways from the state, and like the individual sporting authorities. What it would change currently is the fact that it would, I guess, standardize a lot of the processes. Because right now, what we see is that everything is happening in a really haphazard manner, where what sport is being governed under what guidelines. There's no proper I don't know body overlooking it. That's why even football is having to go to the Supreme Court, which I think we can all agree sounds like a bit of a misuse of state capacity when there's many other issues at hand. So even some of the issues that happened in football this year, not just with ISL but with the I League, there was no proper conflict resolution that happened, and so I think the sports bill would have to address conflict resolution in a way that experts are dealing with it instead of bureaucrats or judges that don't have anything to do with sports, and also keep in mind Olympic and I guess other international body rules in mind, like FIFA or ICC and things like that. And can you think of anything else, okay?
Just to add to what Srushti has mentioned, I think it also brings a lot of accountability and transparency in terms of there is a central body that the national federations can go to, and which is governing them, and there's a clear sort of authority of who does what. I think there's a clear definition. Again, a lot of the national federations, because of the disputes that they find themselves in, we've seen that in various other sports in India over the years. Also, if we remember, there was this whole boxing federation dispute that had happened a couple of years ago. The whole BCCI issue that had come up a few years ago, after which the Supreme Court had intervened and the BCCI went through its regulatory changes, etc. But what essentially a unified sports authority does is it just streamlines governance and regulatory authority to one body, which then oversees general sports in India. It also becomes easy then to keep a track of various sports and then keep uniformity in which sports are governed, and sports laws can then be individualized depending on various individual sports according to the international laws as well.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting the dispute resolution issues. I would actually want you to get directed towards another question that is pertinent right now. As we sit today, there's this annual general meeting of the AIFF being conducted today as today. Um, the there are 12 ISL clubs who have suggested a restructuring of these football clubs, and they have actually demanded for a new league company that will be taken up by the football clubs themselves, with the AIFF being simply a regulatory veto, giving a regulatory veto, a regulatory body they'll be made. How do you see this proposal? How
We as clubs, I'll speak on behalf of the clubs in this situation because I belong to a club that is a part of this league. And I think this solution that the clubs have come up with is something that we think is essential. That we are the clubs are the stakeholders of the league, and the clubs come together collectively to run the league. And there are global precedents of this, right? In football, the top major leagues in the world, the Premier League, and a lot of other top leagues in the world are run on a similar model, where the where the league is owned and operated by the clubs, and the national federation is a part owner in the league, and whatever the revenue that gets generated, etc., gets distributed among the clubs and the federation, etc. And I think India at this point in time is very essential for us to be able to follow the global success model of European leagues and a lot of other top Asian leagues as well, because it has worked well. And here it also means that the ISL clubs are taking up the ownership and responsibility of making sure the broadcast is done at a good scale and a good level, which is then able to generate a lot of interest among fans, sponsors, brands, etc. Uh, the clubs are also taking up the ownership on themselves to ensure that the league is organized in a very professional way, etc. Uh, Very simply, also being said that there is not enough trust in the federation to be able to run a league, because we've seen examples of the leagues which have been run by the AIFF in the past few years, and how miserably they have done in terms of just the governance and the operational aspects of the league. Just to give you an example of the I League, which is the second division league in India, which is also run by and governed by the AIFF. There were so many disputes among the teams where some decisions were being challenged, and those decisions were being then referred to the the AIFF ethics committee and other committees for resolution. But the verdict that was coming out from AIFF was being then challenged by clubs in court for arbitration for sportscasts, and then cast was overturning their verdicts. AIFF was being made to look like someone who's not in control or not fully aware of the regulations and the rules of their own league. So we don't want that. We don't want to be a part of a league where the federation is just not able to manage and operate a league, because it just leaves a very bad impression on the fan sentiment, on the commercial sentiment, on the brands, etc., who want to invest in football in India. So, which is why the clubs, I think, have come out and made this call that okay, the clubs are now not backing out or shying away from the responsibility that they have towards the sport, but the clubs are also finding out ways and coming up with different ways to ensure that there is no halt to the football season in India for this footballing season, because the way things are headed, it definitely seems that we could be headed in that direction. The federation is not very supportive or cooperative towards a lot of the things that are being proposed by the clubs. And also, let me tell you, neither is the federation coming up with a plan. So when there are these meetings and discussions, the proposals are being put forward by the ISL clubs collectively, and AIFF also then needs to come up with a counter proposal if they don't think that the proposals from the clubs are actually working in their favor or in larger interest of the sport in India. So we haven't seen that from the AIFF as well. They haven't been very proactive in suggesting and coming up with plans of themselves. So what's happening in today's meeting is the clubs have come up again since in the last 48 hours, the clubs have been working tirelessly to come up with a proposal to take into AIFF, and they have, and all the clubs have collectively suggested a proposal which the AIFF is now going to present it to the executive committee, because it needs to be ratified by the executive committee to be able to go ahead, for the AIFF to be able to go ahead with it, because it's a long term deal. So we're hopeful that the federation is also mindful of the situation and they act in equal urgency, if not more, that the clubs have shown, which the federation has just refused to up until this point. We're hoping for positive outcomes from this meeting today, and we're hopeful that the federation acts in the best interest of everyone involved in the sport in India at this point.
So, we have seen in the new National Sports Policy 2025 that there's this component of public private partnership, which actually essentially translates to schemes like adopt an athlete or adopt a venue or one corporate, one sport schemes. How do you see this public partnership for football and for sports in general, given the economic potential of sports like football and cricket and otherwise? Yeah.
So,
Okay. So talking about, I think the new National Sports Governance Bill, I think there are a lot of positives that have been proposed to take the sporting to develop and promote sports in India. And I think one of the initiatives about the public-private partnership is a great initiative, in my opinion. And I think it involves or it then invites rather a lot of corporates who through CSR, through a lot of passion projects, want to invest in sports and want to contribute towards the growth of sports in India. We've seen major corporate houses in India, like the JSW Group, like the Reliance Foundation, etc., have done are doing a lot of positive work in not just one particular sport in many ways, but they're actually investing and promoting multiple sports across the country, and that's by giving good coaching, good sporting education, good training facilities, good training methods, good coaches, good equipment, good facilities, etc. And I think the recent success of, for example, the javelin throw success of Neeraj Chopra has inspired a lot of other corporate and other lot of private partners to come in and also contribute towards the development of sports in India. And I think it can be a great CSR initiative for a lot of the major corporates. And I think the government also has recognized that it has limited state capacity. The government then is also looking at actively engaging with the private players for them to unlock investments into various sports, which could possibly lead to the potential growth of the sport in the country. And I think one great example that comes to mind is the state of Odisha. Under at least under the previous government, the state of Odisha has done massively well in sports infrastructure, and I think they've done that brilliantly with a lot of public-private partnership models, where the state has offered a lot of land and help in development of infrastructure, and a lot of private players have then come in and built some incredible facilities in the state of Odisha, mainly Bhubaneswar, and the relaxation, the government has just relaxed a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles in the process of getting clearances in setting up these facilities, and the government has supported in hosting of major international tournaments, etc. And I think with that, when that happens, when there's a lot of ease in regulatory framework uh, of the sport, then it just encourages a lot of the private players to come in and invest as well. And I think it is a good initiative which is being introduced. And with that, I think it has a lot of potential to unlock private investment. Sushi, do you want to come in and add something?
Yeah, I was just like, I agree with you on many of these points as to the fact that I do think that the PPP is a good model for sports sort of regulation in India. Um, but I mean, since the question was also about accountability, I think some drawbacks of PPPs that we need to consider and possibly also just try and resolve on the very policy level itself are, you know, just about one of them is like how much would the private party work in the public interest? So I think, again, since the question was about who in the end is accountable, I think it is very contextual. Like for if you take football, for example, even though it failed as a PPP, you can very easily hold the AIFF responsible. So in this case, the public entity becomes responsible. But like it's like the very old question of profit versus public interest. So I think what a policy would have to address from the very beginning is where the private party is to draw the line when it comes to profit maximization. And also because like I do agree that it's a good opportunity for some CSR initiatives and all, but I think what we see often in these CSR initiatives is that they build the groundwork, but then there's no one to actually maintain it. Because I don't know, power exchanges hands and things like that. So then, who ends up being responsible? Is it the public entity because they were not the ones who started it? And again, one of these things is also a point to consider. Like what happened in football this year is that we are in this situation because we are at the end of the contract with AIFF and FSDL. So like these contract years end up becoming extremely tricky. And there's like when there's actually no proper, how do you say, guidelines as to how to go about these contract years when things haven't gone exactly to plan for either of the entities. It just puts so many people in such a precarious position where clubs have had to shut operations, people have not been getting paid. So it's just, it's a tricky one, PPPs, because it's like you also have to ensure that there's accountability on both ends, because we do know that a lot of puppeting ends up happening, like whose interests, who is serving whose interests, and this is outside of sports, right? People are being done favors here and there. So I think on a very basic level, the policy would have to address these issues for a PPP model, which I agree is one of the better models to be successful in sports, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, what do you think? The should union government set up some minimum standards for the PPP in sports? Would that protect federation or would that scare away the investors?
I do think it would. I don't know if I would say scare away, but yeah, investors are always wary of, I guess, over regulation, right? Like, because you also never know what will happen. Like, sports in India till this year was heavily reliant on funding and investment from the real time money gambling sort of organizations. But suddenly, like a blanket ban coming up would it's not very feasible. So I think, just to answer your question, it would have to walk a very fine line uh, where private interest is the private people have enough incentive to actually want to enter this space because there is enough reason to, but you can't have a situation where every now and then they're just being hit with a new kind of a storm, and then suddenly people are having to scramble and sort of try to protect themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got a lot of insight on this topic. So going back to our first unified topic is that what happens if a domestic law clashes with an international federation rules? Is there a lot of mix-up, or is there a lot of clash, or is it better that we could improve from the international laws?
I think, sorry, Srushti, do you want to go ahead or should I take this?
No, I was gonna say that I think you would be better to answer this. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think it is important that international laws are taken into account, and the various statutes and the various laws that are governing the international body are incorporated into the national sports federations, etc. Because at the end of the day, sport is a global thing, and we're competing internationally, and there has to be some uniformity globally in terms of the way things are being operated, etc. And I think it has to be a combination of domestic laws as well as the international laws that are governed by each individual sport by their international bodies, etc. And I think there has to be like a clear combination of the two, and not one taking precedence over the other. Because at the end of the day, like I was saying, it's just a global thing where there has to be certain uniformities when sport is being competed at a global level and at a larger scale. Which is what I think there is a provision uh, in the legislation of every sports body and in their constitution, etc., that they have to be abiding by their respective international sporting body laws as well, because that would just take away the uniformity in the competition, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, looking at a larger scale, what do you think having a singular law for all the sports, would it help team sports or individual sports? Would there be discretion or differentiations? Or would there be problems with smaller and less popular sports being helped or sidelined?
I think if there is a larger sort of a sports governing authority, what it should be doing is overseeing rather than interfering administratively. I think administrative matters should be controlled and guided by the respective sport federation bodies, etc. And the larger governing body, is more for ensuring that the national federations are acting in the best interest and are abiding by the governance and the regulatory norms that have been set by the government. And I think it's more of overseeing rather than getting involved administratively. So I don't see a lot of conflict. But again, it is very important that the policy is designed to explain this and understand, and is very clear, and the certain targets of every body is specifically outlined, and their targets are outlined, and it is essentially mentioned who's supposed to be doing what. I think it's the important thing rather to take account of in this situation would be the design and implementation of such a policy, and the authority that it gets and it extends itself onto. And it purely serves as long as it purely serves as a regulatory body overseeing the sports federations rather than interfering in their administrative activities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
I agree with that. That instead of, because I think if there's too much over regulation from the central body, then the individual sports that perhaps are not super popular do stand to lose out. But if it's just a body that I don't know, like you said, it oversees instead of over regulates. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, thank you, Shushti and Lokesh. We also wanted to note that there's this whole of government approach in the new national sports policy, which talks of incorporating all ministries and departments in sports promotion. And we also want to develop a culture of fitness, making sports a people's movement. How do you see it? Is it an ambitious claim or is it attainable? How do you see that?
I would say it's pretty attainable. Like I think fitness is something that you need a culture for it, and I mean how to go about doing that is a whole different thing. But I do think that some of I know they've been criticized for all sorts of reasons, but initiatives like Halo India and the sort of the youth-led sports tournaments that are happening are actually leading to a good culture of sports and fitness in the country. And I think Lokesh's example of not Kerala, sorry, Odisha is a good I don't know case study for that. Would you agree? Um,
Yeah, I largely agree. I think it is definitely an attainable target, and I think a way of implementing this could be rework of the National Education Policy (NEP), and I think sports can or should rather take up a major or be looked at very seriously in the curriculum of the National Education Policy of kids growing up, and I think that's the most easiest or I think a large scale impact that you can have of sports is to make it a part of the national education policy and just encourages kids from a very young age, which is a part of the school program, to then be part of and engage in various sports and sporting activities. And I think through the national education policy, sports policy, along with various other ministries like the human resource development, etc., and the child welfare ministry, etc. I think it can be a combined effort to make sports a part of the curriculum of the NEP, and with that, I think we'll see a larger enrollment of kids actively participating in sports. Schools are then encouraged to ensure that they provide enough sporting opportunities to kids, and that I think could be also a place where the culture just grows and develops. The kids are actively seeking and engaging sport from a very young age, and it's not and it can be a part of their educational curriculum. It can be something that they do in school, and I think that is something that could help with the culture shift in a major way. So I definitely think that it is if the policy is implemented and executed correctly, I think there are ways of improving and introducing and improving the sporting culture among the younger generation in India, where sport is being actively pursued and played from a very young age at a school level, which then helps the kids to explore careers in professional sport, etc. So I think it is an attainable objective as long as it is implemented correctly and designed well, the policy.
Thank you. So now this brings us to the end of our podcast. This final question would summarize everything, I guess. Is unified legislation a solution or it's just a signal that reform is needed?
Um, I'm not sure if I would call it the solution. I think, yeah, as you said, it's more of a signal, or I guess somewhat of an attempt, because yeah, in many ways, it's addressing a lot of issues that we see currently in sports, and a lot of the reasons why India is held back internationally in sports, even though it's one of the biggest countries and needs to be more dominant. But I think there are some very key issues within the new policy that I could be cause for concern, because it is, I think, placing a little too much power in the hands of the center, and it's like, you know how they say, it's not deconcentrating enough, um, which I think it's not suitable for a good sort of grassroots development, which is majorly what the country needs. Um, and yeah, so I think that is one big thing that the policy might uh, sort of have a drawback in, among a few others, but that is what I see as one of the key ones. Yeah. What about you, Lokesh, and even
Uh,
you guys?
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that. I think it's more of a signal because it's not solving the problem is not solving itself by a unified sports legislation. But I rather think it is very essential to draw boundaries of governance and regulatory authority of these governing bodies. And with that, I think it's a signal to a lot of to a lot of players, which that with the intention of easing of regulation, which is to ensure that sporting regulations and authority in India is governed in a very transparent way. I think it's more of a signaling mechanism and a policy. I think that's what it would do.
Today's discussion showed that the unified sports legislation is not just about the regulation but also about governing the rights. Using football as an example reminds us that the poor structure affects the entire sporting ecosystem. Whether this law becomes a solution or just a starting point, balance and accountability will be the key. I would like to thank both of you guys, Lokesh and Srushti, for joining us today and giving us your insights. And I would also like to thank Aditi for being a really good co host and supporting us throughout. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you
Thank
for
you so
joining.
much. It was fun interacting with everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.